Well, let me add again my welcome to church. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming and being a part of the worship service. Thankful for all of the things that we get to do to emphasize the power of Jesus through singing, through the practice of baptism, the preaching of the word, the fellowship that we enjoy. And so if you're a guest with us, we just want you to know how thankful we are that you chose to be a part of this worship service together. And one of the things that is consistent in all of our worship services is time to get into the Word of God. And we believe in the structured, the disciplined, and the very intentional approach to studying and preaching the Word of God. And so we go through books of the Bible, and at this point we are going through, for the last couple weeks, the book of 1 Thessalonians. And so let me invite you, if you have a Bible, to join us there in this book of 1 Thessalonians. You also can find it on the app, or you can find it on your tablet or something along those lines. But we definitely want you to see what God says. We have a conviction around here that we believe that it's most important for us to know what God says rather than for you to hear what I say. It's not my opinion. I'm simply a deliverer, a herald of the message that was delivered to me and entrusted to us. And so I just want to simply say, this is what God has to say to you today. This is the message God wants us to bring to you. And I hope that you're here with a heart wide open and a mind wide open and ears wide open to say, all right, Lord, speak. Give me your best and let me know what I need to do and how I need to respond. So we're in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. We're in this series that we've called A Living Hope, finding hope in these last days, or gospel clarity in these last days, because gospel clarity provides us with hope. A clear view of really where our hope is tied off to increases the level of hope that we have in the midst of these last days. I don't know if you are a pessimist or an optimist, but it's easy for everybody to be a little bit of a pessimist and wonder what in the world is happening in these last days. And in the midst of these last days, it's imperative that we, the followers of Jesus Christ, have gospel clarity so that we can have hope that lives and thrives even in the midst of difficult situations. And that is exactly what Paul is writing to the church in Thessalonica about. They were not living in an opulently wealthy suburb. They were not living in ease and comfort. They were not living in a place where Christianity was the common religion or even the common practice of the people in their city. In fact, being a Christian in their city meant that they were going to be opposed, possibly arrested as some were, and ridiculed and shamed for their faith. And so Paul was really intentional on writing to them how to have hope in light of the return of Jesus Christ, in light of the future events that we're going to unwind and unravel. And so he's giving them this hope. And we're not quite there to the meat of the passage yet, or rather the meat of the book. But he's still laying some groundwork. And he's still really kind of leading up to what he needs to say by throwing out relational things, relational characteristics, or tapping into or appealing to them on a relational basis. Chapter 2 is about his ministry. It's about his leadership. It's about how he, as a leader in the church in Thessalonica, really worked for them and is able now to offer them instruction that leads to a living hope or gospel clarity in these last days. Now, I think you can agree there are a few things more frustrating than being lost. Can I get an amen right there? A few things more frustrating than being lost. Now, we men are never lost. It's usually when you ladies are driving that it happens, right? We just know where we're going. We're just taking the scenic route. We don't get lost. We know where we are. I remember 5 years ago, we were celebrating our 10th anniversary, and we found ourselves in Nassau, Bahamas, and we rented a moped. So I'm driving this little moped, and Angela does not want to drive a moped, so she jumps on the back of the moped. And we're talking like a little, I don't know, what are they, 70 cc's or something? And it's one of those, So I'm driving through the streets of Nassau, Bahamas, and I'm like exploring. It's a Sunday morning, and normally I'm in preaching mode on Sunday morning, but we were in Nassau, Bahamas, and so I'm going to ride around on this thing. And sure enough, I rode up some streets, and I got aware very quickly that I was probably not in the neighborhood I was supposed to be in. Because a guy pulls up next to me with his car all decked out, loud music going. They turn the music down. They look out the window, and they say, "Hey, man, are you lost?" I said, "Do I look lost, man?" "No, I'm not lost." But I think that was his way of saying, "You're in the wrong neighborhood. You better go back to the place where the ship is docked." Few things worse than that. There's fewer things, or maybe one thing that may be worse than that is following somebody who's lost. If you're trying to navigate a downtown city area with one-way streets and all kinds of things, and you're following somebody and they're making quick turns and U-turns, it's very frustrating and very difficult to follow somebody who is lost. In life, it's just as frustrating to follow someone who is lost and hard to follow. Now, here's what I believe chapter 2 of 1 Thessalonians is getting at, is that good leaders always know where they are going and how to get there. And it's one of the things that Paul was getting at and was driving at here in chapter 2, is he's tapping into how he ministered to them, how he led them, and how he should be and can be trusted and followed in his endeavor to give gospel clarity to the church so that they could have a hope that lives. We're going to read it. So I want you to find your place there. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, we're going to read verse 1 through verse 12, and I want you to pick out these characteristics that I want you to see are imperative for living hope. Leading to hope. That's what we're titling this. Verse 1. For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with pretext for greed, God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We worked night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct towards you believers. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. This passage is pretty clear. You can see, even as we just read it, that Paul is very intentional on describing why his leadership can and should be trusted by the Christians in Thessalonica. And it was characteristics of his leadership that gave him a grounds to stand upon in encouraging them towards gospel clarity and to experience a living hope. Now, over the top of 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1 through 12, there's a big idea that I want to unpack for you this morning. It's something that we tie everything back to that I'm about to say. And here's what it is. It's this. The best gospel leaders press us toward living hope. The best gospel leaders press us toward living hope. And again, Paul was sharing with them his heart, his intentions as a leader in order to show them and us the characteristics of leaders who press people toward hope. He's going to do that. That's going to be his intention. Beginning in chapter 4, he's going to then push them towards hope and help them to see the hope and the encouragement that is there. But now, before that, he is dealing with some false accusations that were brought against him. It appears that the church in Thessalonica had some critics of Paul's ministry. These critics were saying things like, he's a religious huckster. He ran away suddenly when things got tough, and he hasn't been back since. He's just like many of the other religion business people, a charlatan who uses religion as a cover so that he can get your money, seduce your women, exalt himself in power over you. He's not sincere. He's not genuine. He's being exposed here. And when he got exposed, he ran away, showing that he doesn't care about you. And Paul is saying that is so far from the truth. You know our life. You know our leadership, and you know our ministry among you. You know that we led and we served and we cared for you. And you know that our attempt to lead you toward hope didn't come from us being hucksters or charlatans, but came from a genuine desire to help you and bless you. Because it was imperative for him to say this, because the best gospel leaders press us toward living hope. Now, why is this important for you and me? It's important for multiple reasons. One is because you are a follower. We all are. People lead us. The leaders of your church lead. The leaders of the people you listen to, they influence you and they lead you and they push you towards something. They increase your anxiety, they increase your worry, they increase your fear, they increase your confusion, they increase your lack of clarity, or the leaders that lead you, increase your clarity, increase your confidence, increase your hope, and increase your sanity. And you've got to be careful on who you are allowing to lead you. But not only that, you are leading. There are people who follow you. There are people who you influence. There are kids in your house. There's family members. There's friends. There's coworkers. There's neighbors. There's people who you lead. And it is imperative that as a leader, a person who does influence people, that you are a person who is giving gospel clarity in a day that is desperately needing gospel clarity. No matter where you find yourself leading, you need to lead with gospel clarity, toward gospel clarity. You need to be the best gospel leader so that you can press people towards hope. And so if you are a leader, which you are, or you are a follower, which you are, it is imperative that you know the marks or the traits of the best gospel leader. So that's what we're going to answer today. What are the traits that he's pointing out? What are the things that he pointed out about his ministry that are traits of good gospel leaders so that we can be and follow good gospel leaders? And there's 5 of them. Here's how we're going to do it today. The best leaders press me by. That's our lead-in line. So if you're used to the preaching here, you know that we're going to give you a lead-in line, and every one of them is going to follow that idea so that you can track this, okay? The best leaders press me. And by the way, you leaders press others by these 5 things. Number 1, the best leaders press me by gospel preaching, not posing. Now, verse 1 and 2 is where we see that. Now, you're going to find that throughout this passage, you may have already done it, Paul gives a paradox, if you will. I did not do this, but rather we did this. And so the first thing he did is said, I didn't pose. Verse 1, you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. Now, we might use the word vain as fruitless or worthless or lacking productivity, but he is using the word here, we believe, based on the context, with regard to the character and the sincerity of his coming to them and proclaiming God's truth. He was coming, he was saying, with authentic earnestness and substance. It was not empty. It was not without power. It was not prompted by vain methods, motives, or means. He is saying that they did not enter the city and enter into their lives with unsound motives and empty and self-serving purposes. We didn't come here for self-serving purposes. We didn't come here just to fulfill a job or fulfill a religious duty. We didn't come here without an intentional purpose and sincere motives. They came with pure motives, sincere intentions, in making a difference in the city. They weren't posers. You remember posers in school? How many of you called people posers back when you were in high school or middle school? I did. You had your jocks, you had your skaters, you had your grunge, you had your preppies, and you had your posers. Now, I don't know where you were. I don't know even what I was. I probably was a poser if you don't know what you are. Those are the people who just try to fit in. They just try to pose. So one day I'm a skater, the next day I'm a jock, the next day I'm a preppy, the next day I don't even know what I am, but I'm just going to be a chameleon and fit in with whatever group I'm hanging out with. And Paul is saying that we were not posing as charlatans. We weren't posing as preachers. We were not just spreading some new religious fad or some new religious trendy thing. We were genuine. And here's why he says about that, or what he says about that. Verse 2, that though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. Now, instead of entering the city with impure motives and empty promises, they entered preaching and teaching the gospel. The true character of these missionaries is that they preached even though they had previously suffered for doing so. In fact, one of the greatest marks of authentic leadership is that they continue to lead and fulfill their mission in the midst of pressure, in the midst of persecution, in the midst of affliction. The authenticity of their ministry in Thessalonica, we know, was bold to preach the gospel because it continued even in the face of opposition. College football started a couple weeks ago, and some people really didn't feel like America opened back up until college football started. And some of you Southern people really didn't feel like it opened back up until yesterday when the SEC actually started playing football. Is there anybody that feels that way today? All right, good. A couple of you did. Good. Not me. Pac-12 still hasn't started yet, so life is still on hold. But SEC football, one of the things that amazes me about watching football, especially these kids, is that the quarterback is often so committed to the mission of delivering a pass that he will stay in the pocket in spite of the intensity of the pressure of a big, fat lineman plowing at him to destroy him. I did say fat, I'm sorry. So some of you are like, he just said fat. Like, I can't believe that. But think about the reality that this quarterback, who's probably 6'3", 6'2", 6'1", 190, 210 pounds, is being pressured by a 350-pound guy who runs a 5-second 60. I don't know that's pretty fast, but it's pretty quick. And he's coming at them to destroy him. If he could, he would rip his head off. And those quarterbacks, they stay in that pocket and they deliver a pass and then they take the blow as if for the normal person it would destroy, our limbs would come flying off. And this guy is so committed. Here's the reality. They are so committed to the purpose that they are tasked with to deliver the ball to the receiver that they're willing to do it in the face of opposition. They're willing to do it in the pressure that is coming their way. That is one of the greatest marks of authenticity towards a mission, and that's what Paul is saying. He's saying, you want to test our motives? You want to test whether or not we were posers? Just realize that we came to you preaching the gospel in spite of the fact that we were just in prison for doing the same thing at City Over. So what's the point? The point is this. The best leaders that press people toward hope in these last days are the leaders that faithfully preach truth into the lives of those they are leading. They are the ones who don't hypocritically lead. They don't follow the trends of the day, but they preach truth regardless of whether or not they are popular. Paul told Timothy to be instant in season and out of season, to do it when it's popular and to do it when it's not. Hypocritical leadership is not only ineffective for the followers, it is destructive to their faith. It not only not leads towards hope, hypocritical leadership robs the followers of their hope. The best gospel leaders, they speak truth regardless of the repercussions that may come their way if they do. That's what daddies do to their kids. They preach and speak truth into the lives of their kids regardless of whether or not it's popular or it's trendy. That's what leaders do in the workplace and in their neighborhood, is they continue to stand for truth even when their faith is waffling and wavering, even when they are discouraged and possibly even feeling like I'm alone. They continue to stand for and preach and teach truth because that's the characteristic of the best gospel leaders that press people toward hope. You get that? Okay. So good leaders preach, they don't pose. Number 2, notice with me, the best leaders press me by gospel stewarding, not swindling. Now look at verse 3. For our appeal, so the argument or the thing we presented to you, it did not come from error. It did not come from impurity or any attempt to deceive. The ministry of Paul and his missionary team of Silas and Timothy and others, probably Luke and others, was completely different than the common philosophers or messengers of the false religions of the day. F.F. Bruce pointed out that so many wandering charlatans made their way about the Greek world, peddling their religious and philosophical nostrums and living at the expense of their devotees. And Paul says, I am not one of those. Their message did not spring from error or from impure motives. Their message was clear. It was the truth of God. It was not from error. Their motive was right, is pure and not seeking self-gratification. It was not from impurity. And he says their method of ministry was honest and straightforward, not from any attempt to deceive. But what it actually was this. Look at verse 4. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak. We speak because we have been entrusted. Something has been entrusted to our care. Something that doesn't belong to us. It is the gospel of God. It is God's truth. It is God's good news, and it has been entrusted to us. And what is entrusted to us requires that we be faithful stewards. Faithful stewards are people who recognize that they have been given something that doesn't belong to them. Therefore, they do not have the authority to tweak it or alter it or make it sound or look different, but it is only for their job to fulfill the purpose of the one who entrusted it to them. And he says this is especially special because we were approved by God to be entrusted with this. God considered us faithful. God considered us worthy to be receivers of the gospel so that we can then steward the gospel which was entrusted to us. Therefore, we have one goal. Here it is, ready? We speak. But we speak with the pleasure of one person in mind, not man, but to please God. It is imperative for a man or a woman or person who is a steward of the gospel, entrusted with a message, to have one purpose in pleasing one person, and that is God. Man does not sit on judgment over you in the end. So if I as a preacher attempt to get your opinion and the new fad and the new trend and test the wind of the season and the wind of the pop culture to figure out what it is I need to say and what it is I need to speak, what I am saying is I am more interested in the approval of man than I am in the approval of God. But God says that's not what stewards do, or Paul says that's not what stewards do. Stewards who recognize that they've been entrusted with the gospel are committed to the pleasing of God because they know that it is God who tests our hearts. We know that it is God we will stand before one day. When I was 18, I think it was, I was borrowing, my brother had a 1991 SR5, Toyota SR5 pickup. You know what I'm talking about? It's the Tacoma, but it's before they called them Tacomas. And it was a cool little white truck. He had stickers on it, and he had some bigger wheels on it, and I was driving it. And you know where this story's going, I think, don't you? I was pulling a trailer because I was doing some work and using his truck to pull the trailer. He was a firefighter, so I was using his truck to pull the trailer and do some work. And I was in a really big hurry, and so I pulled out of out of front of my road, my house, and I flipped a U-turn. I didn't make the U-turn, so I backed up to finish the U-turn, and I forgot that I didn't unhook the trailer. So I jackknifed the trailer. Well, I was ticked at this point because I was running late for something, so I just popped it in reverse, zipped it around, took off the trailer, and took off and went where my brother was, by the way. And I pulled up, and I was like, hey, man. He's like, what in the world did you do to my truck? I was like, what are you talking about? The whole back end of the truck, because of the jackknife trailer, was completely damaged and busted and broken in. And I walked out saying, I don't even know what you're talking about. He said, what in the world did you do my... I was a poor steward of something that belonged to somebody else. I didn't really care. I didn't really take the time to pay attention to what was happening. In fact, I often tried to put stickers on the bumper myself and throw my stuff in the truck. And he'd throw my stuff out and say, this isn't your truck, man. Get your stuff out of my truck. Now, we were loving brothers. We were kind and gracious. At least I was. He was a little bit of a hothead. But I was a poor steward because I treated something that belonged to somebody else as if it was mine to adjust or mine to abuse or mine to do what I wished to do with it. And that is not what Paul said he had the liberty to do, because he was a gospel leader. Therefore, he recognized that he was entrusted with something that was not his, but it was God's, and he didn't possess the authority or the right to change it or alter it for the pleasure of somebody who didn't entrust him with that message. That's what the best gospel leaders do, don't they? The best leaders press us towards hope in these last days because they are leaders who see themselves as stewards entrusted by and accountable to God for how they lead. A steward does not have the right to change or alter it. Therefore, we as stewards of the authority and the leadership and the gospel and the ministry that we have do not have the ability to alter it. We seek to steward the gospel for the pleasure of God. This is what good parents do, by the way. Good parents steward well the message and the authority they have with their kids. Good churches do this. Good pastors do this. Good small group leaders do this. In any capacity that you lead, you do this. You don't see yourself as the person that has the right to alter the message or alter the ministry or alter the purpose. You see one that has been entrusted with the message so that you can please the one who entrusted you with it. The only time a leader seeks to please the people is because of what he might get from the people. And Paul said, my goal is not to get anything from the people. My only goal is to get something from God, and that is his approval. That I ran the race that he called me to run, and I stewarded well that which he entrusted to me. You get that? So best leaders, the good leaders, the leaders actually push people toward hope are the people who steward well that which they've been given. And third, the best leaders press me by, here's what he says, gospel caring, not conning. Now he says in verse 5 and 6, for we never came with words of flattery. The word words of flattery is an attempt to persuade someone by use of insincere speech or exaggerated praise. You look amazing, right? That exaggerated praise. You did phenomenal. You are the best person in this world. You're just overwhelming flattery for the purpose of getting something out of them. And Paul says, I didn't come flattering you with insincere speech or exaggerated praise. I didn't do that. We didn't come with a pretext for greed. He says that, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. We didn't put on a false front, nor put on a mask to cover up our greed. We didn't preach among you in order to shake out whatever financial gain we could from you, trying all the way time to hide our motives. We didn't do that. Flattery and greed often went hand in hand. In this day, it was said by Gene Green that often people would come into the cities. They would flatter the people of the city in hopes that they would get something from the people of the city. And Paul, not on accident, used those together. And he said, not only that, we did not seek, nor did we seek glory from people. He denies ever seeking the glory and recognition and fame and honor from the Thessalonians. He didn't just come to Thessalonica because there was a new pool of followers that he could get to add to his harem or his group of people. Paul was denying a probable accusation thrown his way that he was only there to flatter them in order to get something from them and to get their recognition. Biblical hope-giving leadership never leads with flattery and never leads in order to get something from the people they are leading. Instead, he says this. Listen to this picture in verse 7. But we were gentle among you. We were gentle. And then he taps into the greatest and probably most pinnacle example of gentleness that is known to man on the earth. And that is like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. There's no better example of selfless, caring service given to another human than that of a mother. Can never forget the gentleness and kindness that Angela gave toward our 4 children when they were little and helpless and needy individuals, when she fed them and when she cared for them and when she changed their diapers. And she was a whole lot more gentle than Daddy was. She was a whole lot more gracious than Daddy was. I was begrudging and mad that they actually went to the bathroom the whole time I was changing a diaper rather than just realizing this is part of it. But she was gentle and she was kind and she was affectionately, notice what he says, verse 8, she was affectionately desirous of them, just as Paul said, I am of you. The word affectionately desirous it's one word in the Greek, and it means to have a deep, intense love. It's the warm affection and the tender yearning that a mother would have towards her kids. It's this heart that is swelled full of compassion. And Paul looks at the church in Thessalonica and he says, we didn't come with any pretense for greed. We didn't come to use you and squeeze you for all we could get out of you, but we actually came like a mother comes to her children, with gentleness and a deep, intense love for you. We were ready, he says, because of that love that we had for you, to share with you not only the gospel of God. Like, we didn't just come to deliver a message and say, here's the message, see you later. He says we actually came and shared our own selves. Listen to the intensity of this. The affection and love that they had for these people drove them to give everything they had for these people. And he's saying, you know this. You know my heart. You know that I love you. You know that we labored for you. You know that we love you this intensely. Even so much so, he says this, look what he says there in verse 8. He says, because you had become very dear to us. You'd become very dear to us. Man, we loved you deeply, passionately. We were gentle and we were kind and we were gracious. And here's what he's saying. Listen to this. The best leaders, the ones that press us toward hope in these last days, the ones that give and lead to gospel clarity are people who are caring and compassionate and gentle and loving like a mother is to those they lead, not taking advantage of their position to serve themselves. They're not self-serving. James paradoxes this in James 3. I would love to take the time. We're not going to, but James chapter 3, verse 13 through 18. James is addressing people who thought they were leaders in the church and operating with wisdom. And he says, you guys want to know what real wisdom is? The real wisdom that comes from God is not jealous. It's not selfishly ambitious. It's not earthly. It's not jealous. It's not disorderly. It doesn't do all of these things. But he says the wisdom that leaders in the church actually operate with is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial, and sincere. So again, in that passage, he's saying the best leaders among you are not the ones who seek to get something from you and con you, but are the ones who come there to actually serve you and care for you like a mother would her children. That's what the best gospel leaders do. That's what we do. If we're going to make a difference in the lives of the people we lead, is we are going to lead them with a compassion that is so deep and so intense that we will not only give them the message that we are called to deliver, but we will give them ourselves to serve them and bless them. So that's number 3. Write this down. Number 4 is here, and it is clear. The best gospel leaders, the best leaders that press us to living hope and press us with gospel clarity, they do this. Notice what he says in verse 9. They provide gospel providing, not pirating. They press me by providing, not pirating. Now look at 9. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. Those are words that describe the intensity of work that they were going through. That we worked night and day. Like I don't know if that means they were up 24 hours a day, but it sounds like it. They just worked hard. And they were very intent on toiling and laboring and striving and agonizing in their work, working committedly, working night and day for this purpose, that we might not be a burden to any of you. So what he's saying is, he's reminding them how while he was in Thessalonica, he was intent on not being a financial burden to them in Thessalonica. He reiterates this in 2 Thessalonians 3:8 when he says, look, it was important for us not to eat any man's bread without paying for it, but we labored and toiled so that we would not be a burden to any of you. Instead of being a burden upon them financially, Paul and his team, they worked to provide for their own needs and their own meals. He not only wanted to provide for his own financial needs, listen, this is where it goes. He was intent on providing them with the gospel instruction while being totally above reproach and accusation. Look at verse 9 again. We didn't want to be a burden to any of you while we proclaimed to you the gospel of God. Here's what he's saying. Get this. We came not to be takers. We came to be givers. We didn't come to be served. Look, we could have. He even says that in verse number 10, that we could have as apostles. We could have demanded that you pay us, or that you serve us, or that you provide for us and that you pay our bills, but we didn't, because we didn't want to be any weight upon you except for the weight of the gospel. We wanted to serve you. We wanted to instruct you. We wanted to lead you. We wanted nothing to hinder us from impacting you to the fullest measure that our ministry could. And that's what the best gospel leaders do. The best leaders that press us toward hope in these last days are leaders that are earnest to provide service for us and gospel instruction for us, not by adding some extra burden upon us. I read today that during the American Revolution, there was a man in civilian clothes, and he rode past a group of soldiers repairing a small defensive barrier. And their leader was instructing them and shouting while on his horse, but he was not making any attempt to help them. He was just shouting literally on his high horse, yelling at them and telling them to do this and do that without any attempt to help them. He was asked why he was doing that, and he said, because I am a corporal, sir, with dignity. The stranger apologized, dismounted his horse, and proceeded to help the exhausted soldiers. The job done, he turned to the corporal and said, Mr. Corporal, the next time you have a job like this and not enough men to do it, go to your commander-in-chief and I will come and help you again. And that was General George Washington. The best gospel leaders, they don't take, they give. They don't come to be served, they come to serve. They don't come to be a burden other than placing the burden of the gospel instruction upon the people whom they are leading. That's why Paul said, do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. We need to surround ourselves with leaders and strive to be leaders who are careful to provide gospel ministry, not take from the people we lead. It's easy for pastors to do this, I'll admit that. It's easy for us as leaders to do this. It's easy for us to see the people we lead as means to accomplish a task or a goal or a vision, rather than to see the actual people that we do lead as the mission and the vision and the purpose of our ministry. And we've got to be intentional to avoid that and get down and get dirty and serve and provide, not take. There's one last one I want to give you and we're done. The best leaders not only press me by preaching and stewarding well and by caring and by providing, they do this. They press me by training, by gospel training, not trashing. Let me explain what we mean by that. Verse 11, he finishes out his description here in this passage of his leadership, and he says, for you know how, like a father. So now he was like a mother. Now he's also like a father with his children. So he was caring for them and he was engaging with them. He was getting down and wrestling on the floor with them, if you will. He was investing in his children, because fathers, we know, can be harsh on their children. We know that. I can be. A good father is not harsh. It's not one that trashes or belittles or ridicules or criticizes, but a good father is engaged in the training and development of his children. And there's 3 ways that Paul says he did that as a good father. He exhorted them. That means to come alongside of, for the purpose of directing to a certain end. So he comes alongside of them. And in coming alongside of them to help them to a certain end, he encourages them. It's the idea of more intense saying, you can do this, you're okay, you got this. It's like the skating rink endeavor of holding your kids' hand around the skating rink, and you come alongside of them and you're helping them to get to an intended purpose, and the whole time you're encouraging them, you can do this, you can make this. There's a goal, there's an end, you can do this, just push this foot this way and that foot that way. We can do this, we can make this. And he says, I came as a father, put my arm around you to get you to a certain end and to encourage you to get there, and do that with, he says, charging them, to charge you. There in verse 11, or verse 12, we exhorted you, each one of you, and encouraged you and charged you. The word charge there means that they expressed or summoned or pled or implored or begged, or with tears in their eyes, with intensity, urged them towards an end. So here's the picture Paul is saying. I did not come to you to trash you. I didn't come to you to be harsh on you. I didn't come to you to browbeat you. I came to you to come alongside of you, put my arm around you, encourage you when you were discouraged, and instruct you towards a certain end. And that end, he says very clearly in verse 12. Notice what he says. Here's what he charged them to do: to walk in a manner worthy of God. To walk in a manner worthy of God. This doesn't mean to walk in a way so that you can become worthy of his salvation. There ain't nobody here that has that ability in them, right? Excuse the poor grammar. There's not any person here. There's nobody here that can actually walk worthy. So what he's saying is not that you would walk worthy so that God will save you, but he's saying that you will walk worthy because God has already saved you. Notice what he says there in verse 12. To walk worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. So he's saying walking worthy is a way of walking or living your life that is befitting for people who have been introduced to the saving power of Jesus Christ. So he's saying my goal in coming alongside of you wasn't to beat you, it wasn't to browbeat you, it wasn't to trash you, it wasn't to criticize you, it wasn't to ridicule you, it was to come alongside of you to say you can do this and encourage them towards an end, which that end was living a life worthy of God who had called them to salvation. Now my sinfulness as a father can make me become pretty harsh and hard on my son. And I know it's hard to believe. I'm a pretty soft-spoken, gentle, easygoing guy. I know that. And you're shocked by that, but I can push him hard. I mean, he's only 8, so you can judge me all you want because it's sinful. And I can criticize him quickly, especially when he's playing sports or cleaning his room or not cleaning his room. I can be very hard on him. I can also be very unengaged with him. My sinfulness can really cause me to disengage and be interested in my own leisure and my own hobbies and my own comfort rather than engaging with my kids and my son and training him. And so here's what Paul is saying is, I did not come to be harsh with you, nor did I come to disengage with you. I came to throw my arm around you, lead you to a certain end, instruct you on how to live a life worthy of the God who called you into his own kingdom and glory. I've learned that there is great joy for me as a dad in seeing my kids succeed in something that they set out towards, so much so that I love coming alongside of them and encouraging them and helping them to that end. And Paul says, that's what I do. That's what my goal was. That's what the best leaders do. They don't give us liberty and freedom to just do whatever we want to do and find our own way. They come alongside of us and they don't trash us and browbeat us and they don't disengage from us, but they engage by throwing an arm around them and saying, let's go. You can do this. Let's live for God. God has called you into his kingdom and his glory. God is amazing and God is gracious and God is powerful and God is kind. And that's literally what I think we try to do as leaders every Sunday, is to say, God is worthy of your life. God has saved you. God has the ability to keep you. He is faithful. He is kind. He is gracious. We sing he is coming again, not because we just like singing about the world burning up. We sing about that because we're excited about the reality that he is calling us into his own kingdom and glory. And we're doing all of that to remind you that he's worth living for. He's worthy of your life, and there is a way to live that is honoring to him and glorifying to him, that is befitting of those who know him and have experienced his salvation. The best gospel leaders don't browbeat you and guilt you and legalize you into some form of action. They push you towards a God who is glorious and gracious. And that's what Paul is saying he does as a good father. So the best gospel leaders press us toward living hope. That's what we do. That's what they do. So here's the deal. They preach, they steward, they care, they provide, and they train. Now look, I understand that the overwhelming, there's an overwhelmness about the reality that I lead people, but you do. Sociologists tell us that even the most introverted person will influence 10,000 other people during their lifetime. Like you think you're the most introverted person and you're sitting there saying, I'm sure glad he's preaching to everybody else but me. But the reality is that you lead, you influence people. You influence people towards an end. You influence and lead people towards a goal. And so my question for you is that the principles here are so imperative for us to know because we need to know who we follow and how we lead. So dad, check yourself. Leaders, women, check yourself. Let's check ourselves, church. Let's check ourselves. Let's check who we're following. Check me. Ask yourself, is that the guy that I should follow? Is he doing this? Check that. Check us as elders. Check us as staff. Check the people you listen to. Check the people you follow. Who's influencing your brain? Who's influencing your thinking? Who's influencing your worldview? And make sure that you are careful to know who you are following and how you are leading those who follow you. Because the best gospel leaders press us towards hope. But here's the deal. Poor gospel leaders rob us of our hope. They steal from us our gospel clarity, which rips away from us the living hope that we so desperately need in these last days. So, the best gospel leaders press us towards living hope. Let me give you 3 learning to live statements today that will close us off and finish our time together. 3 statements that I need you to consider carefully. Here it is. Number 1, consider carefully the gospel you believe. The best leaders that actually lead people toward hope are the leaders who have a firm grip of the gospel. The good news of the gospel is that God created you for his glory, but you fell short of his glory. So he, instead of sending you to eternal punishment, he sent his son to die for your sin so that you can have eternal life by placing your faith and trust in him as your Lord and Savior. That's the gospel. That's the message. And if you don't have that as the foundation of your life, then you are not leading people towards gospel clarity. You are influencing people away from gospel clarity, which is robbing people of their hope. So if you are a leader, which you are, and you are following leaders, it is imperative that you have a clear understanding of what the gospel is. It is imperative that you have a gospel regeneration story like John Castro did this morning in the baptistry, declaring it to you. It is imperative. So consider carefully the gospel you believe. Second, consider carefully the leaders you follow. We've already talked about that, but let me just say it again. Consider carefully the leaders you follow. Who do you follow? Why do you follow them? Where are they leading, and how much influence do you allow them to have in your life? Consider that carefully. The man and woman you are becoming is heavily influenced by the people you are following. And if they are not gospel leaders pushing you towards a living hope, then you are not heading towards an increased, thriving, living hope in these last days. And lastly, consider carefully the mission that you advance. As a leader and influencer, you are advancing a purpose and a mission. As stewards of the gospel and commission to carry out the gospel into all the world, we must be all about it as leaders. We must be all about the advancement of the mission. So consider carefully, where are you leading people toward? What mission are you promoting in your leadership? Is the end gospel clarity and living hope by faith in Jesus Christ? Because if it's not, then you are not offering living hope. You are offering an unclear, unsound trumpet in a day that is desperately needing it. So come to Christ, lead people toward Christ, influence people with Christ. May that be the truth that we let settle into us today. Today we're going to pray and then we're going to sing, Christ be magnified. What better song, huh? What better song to end with? Christ be magnified. That's the goal of a leader, is that Christ would be magnified, that Christ's name would be lifted up, that Christ's glory would be prominent and preeminent in our lives. And so we're going to sing that as a declaration of people of influence and people who follow leaders, that Christ would be magnified and glorified in our lives.